So I think, hello everyone, hello everybody. So
hello.
We are, hello. So I think we can now start this this session, photovoltaic session of this Congress online of IAEE. So as you know, we have 4 presentations this morning. Presentation that have to be done in 20 minutes because the schedule is very tight. So 20 minutes for presentation, and we have a margin of 5 minutes for questions and discussion. So I will give you an indication for the last 5 minutes during your presentations, and then I think now, if Bruce Mountain is ready, we will be able to start for this first paper, which called Rooftop Solar PV in whose interests. And after we have another paper, Concentration Solar Power versus Photovoltaic, and Franziska Schöniger, which I think is here, will present you as I see. Bruce is going to share his slide. It's okay. Then we have on the potential of the PV as an appliance, presented by Auer. And last, Olusola Bamisile will present policy development for solar water heaters in the Mediterranean. So please, Bruce, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for kicking it off, and it's nice to be at this session. My name is Bruce Mountain. I'm the head of the Victoria Energy Centre. You can see our logo on the left-hand side of your screen, and I am based in Melbourne, Australia. I'm talking about some research that myself, Kelly Burns, who's on this call as well, who's just put her hand up, and Stephen Percy jointly did about 18 months ago, but whose outcome has been influential in policy settings in our country, where there's proposals to put charges on households who export rooftop solar. We were motivated to ask and answer the question, who gains and who loses when households install rooftop solar. So let me see if I can get this to go to the next slide, and I'll give you a bit of an outline of my presentation, our research question, the data we used, the methods we used to analyze our data, what the results are, and the policy implications. So this is all rather wordy. Don't bother too much about reading it. I'll take you through the main points. Rooftop solar is popular in Australia. Around 1 in 4 homes have it. And in some states of Australia, 1 in 3 homes have it. So there's 2.7 million households with rooftop solar out of a total number of households of around 9.4 million. And it's still growing quickly, about another 6, maybe 500,000 households every year. Governments have had policy support for rooftop solar in its early days, but as rooftop solar prices came down, so they dropped the policy support. In some states, such as ours, governments still encourage rooftop solar uptake, but they have means testing on it so that those subsidies don't apply to households that have the ability to invest themselves. As I mentioned earlier in my introductory remarks, our national energy regulator, the Australian Energy Markets Commission, which sets the rules, it's now proposed to allow the distributors, the poles and wires operators, to charge households when they export to the grid. And that's a very heated policy for discussion at the moment. Other context is there are a few studies here by researchers who contend that households with solar are being subsidized by households that don't have solar, and their basis of that view is around the tariff structure that they feel would be more appropriate for households with rooftop solar. Other studies have recognized rooftop solar impacts the wholesale electricity market because it comes in at the bottom of the merit order. It pushes off the most expensive generator, and so it has wholesale price impacts, but they had not, until our study, been quantified. Finally, there's a recognition that rooftop solar, in some cases in the distribution networks, is giving rise to incremental expenditure to expand transformer and other capability to allow it to export to the grid. But here too, we found at the time of our study that these issues are not well understood. And so it is unsurprising that the price impacts of rooftop solar for consumers, for large firms and households with solar and the network providers is an uncertain space. So our question is, what impact does rooftop solar have on the price of electricity paid by other consumers? Is it true that there's a cross subsidy or not? Let me go to the next slide. So our data, we obtained 48,000 household electricity bills over a 6-month period a couple of years ago. These were PDF electricity bills. So these were the bills sent to them by their electricity retailers. And we use software to extract relevant data from those bills, such as how much they consume, what the type of tariff they're on, how much rooftop solar they export, what feed-in price they get for that exports, if they have a discount on their energy or fixed parts of their bill, do they get a government subsidy, whose network service provider area are they in, and what's the name of their energy retailer. So we extracted all of that data in an automated way, which gave us a huge data set of actual bills. We didn't need to take a view on what we thought customers were paying. We had a large data set of actual bills. Of that 48,000, there were 7,200 households that had rooftop solar. And we used a model that we developed in other contexts to work out the gross rooftop solar production. And we needed to work out the gross because there is no central measurement of gross rooftop solar production. What the network sees is the net export, but there is no central measurement of the gross energy production. And so we can know the net export. If we have an estimate of the rooftop solar size and we know how much they're buying from the grid, we can back calculate using our model to work out the gross energy production. We then sought to work out, having established the gross energy production, we sought to estimate the impact of rooftop solar on the revenues that are recovered by the network service providers. These are the firms that operate the poles and wires that ship electricity to the customer. And we used a regression in which we had the revenue on the left-hand side of the regression, and the explanatory variables were the volume of grid purchases plus rooftop PV sourced electricity for those that had solar. And then we had dummy variables based on whether they got a subsidy from the government, whether they had an off-peak order tariff, or whether they had solar. And we took account of their distributor and their tariff type. And we used tests to make sure the results were valid. We then seek to estimate the effect of rooftop solar on wholesale electricity prices, again through another ordinary least squares regression, where we had the settlement price, which is the half-hourly spot price, the wholesale electricity price in the Victorian region, which is where we did our study. And we sought to explain that price, knowing for every half hour, the wind generation, the solar, large-scale solar, as well as rooftop solar generation what the demand plus inter-regional import or export to our state was, what the gas prices were, how much coal generation capacity there was in the market, and then we used a bunch of dummies to account for monthly fixed effects, which account for seasonal changes and other factors. The wholesale price data used in the model covered half-hourly intervals from 1st of April 2016 to 30th of October 2018, which is around the end date of our study. And the coefficient on solar generation gives us the impact of rooftop PV generation on wholesale prices. And again, we tested the model to make sure that the results were likely to be valid. What did we find? Not from the regressions, but from our calculations, that the median household with rooftop solar RT-PV exports 2.2 megawatt hours a year and self-consumes 1.6. So gross rooftop solar production in our data set of 7,200 homes was about 3.8 megawatt hours each year. Households with rooftop PV paid $590 less per year for electricity, which was about a 30% reduction on what their bills would have been if they were buying electricity from the grid. Estimating the private benefit that households with rooftop PV get from their investment in rooftop PV is complicated because of the large reductions in the PV capital cost and also the reductions in the subsidy. So we didn't know how much each of our 7,200 households paid for their solar systems, which will have been installed generally in the last 5 years. But we do know the price changed radically. So we felt we couldn't estimate the private benefit that they got from it. From our ordinary least squares to estimate the network effects, we estimated rooftop solar caused network access charges, so the rates paid for usage of the network, to rise by about 1% higher than they otherwise would have been. And we found that this effect was higher than it otherwise would have been because rooftop PV customers are typically on 2-rate tariffs. And so if they were on the same non-time variant tariffs as other customers, the impact would have been even smaller. With respect to the wholesale market price impacts, our models estimated that rooftop PV reduced wholesale market prices by $6.4 a megawatt hour, which was about 8% reduction on average prices in 2019. So the net effect of the wholesale price reduction and network price increases meant that rooftop PV provided shared benefits, net shared benefits of 217 million in Victoria, our state, in 2019. We don't know the extent to which this was captured by the energy suppliers, the retailers, in higher profits, or the extent to which it was passed on to all consumers in the form of lower prices. If we assume it was passed on in the form of lower prices, then the net gain, taking the disbenefit of network charges being higher against the gain of wholesale prices being lower, is worth about $5 per megawatt hour. Or if we worked it out as a fixed charge, as $84 per year per household. So the main conclusions is rooftop PV pushes down wholesale markets far more than it raises prices in network charges. Just to be clear, it raises them for the networks because under our regulatory regime, the networks are entitled to get a fixed amount of revenue back. And so when they sell less electricity, because households with rooftop solar use less electricity, then that's the reason for network prices going up. But we found that those network effects were small for several reasons. Firstly, households' self-consumption of their own of the solar that they have on their own roof is actually quite small. Only about 1/3 of the electricity that they produce is self-consumed. because even small solar systems produce more electricity than typical households use at the time when the sun is shining. And so they export most of what they actually produce. The other reason is networks have anticipated the rise of self-consumption or self-energy production by households and small businesses, and they've increased their fixed component of their network charge by far more than the variable component. It's increased roughly 5-fold over the last 7 years, whereas the variable component increased by about 61%. And so with the substantially fixed charge-based tariff structure, they are much less exposed to consequential changes in consumption volumes. Finally, on the question of whether rooftop solar causes incremental network expenditure to augment the network to be able to accommodate greater network, more energy production by businesses and households with solar. AusNet Services, which is the biggest network operator, worked out that the effect of the expenditure is 72 cents per residential customer per year, and they typically charge them about $500. So essentially, it's inconsequential. What are the policy implications? We think the policy implications are quite clear. The aggregate private benefits of rooftop solar PV may exceed the aggregate shared benefits. So it might be that households that install rooftop solar get more benefit than is the shared benefits. But the private gains to those households that install rooftop solar do not come at the expense of shared costs. So there is not a cross-subsidy issue here where households without solar are bearing costs of households with solar. In fact, it works the other way. Households with solar are bringing about a shared benefit in the form of lower prices for all energy consumers. And therefore, we think policy makers who've been very keen to promote rooftop solar might take comfort that rooftop solar produces benefits for all electricity consumers. I'll finish just by mentioning, as I said earlier, that the Energy Markets Commission is introducing or seeking to introduce changes in policy which will charge households with rooftop solar to export. We've argued that the evidence that they've based that on is simply not correct. And we think it actually reflects lobbying by the energy retailers and the network companies and some of the social policy advocates, which is not based on a sound evidence base. We think that rooftop solar is a gain for everyone, and policymakers should stand by the much further growth of it in the next years that actually lie ahead. So I think I'll probably stop sharing my screen there and return to the organizer for questions.
Okay, thank you, Bruce, for this presentation. So we have more now than 5 minutes for questions and discussion. I ask for attendees and the floor to see if there are questions.
Yeah, so
Hans, please.
So thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. So my question is, in Australia, do you also discuss already peer-to-peer matching and trading concepts? So among PV prosumers, so in the sense of energy community concept beyond the meter.
Yes, there's lots of interest in peer-to-peer trading. There's lots of interest in local neighborhood trading, both grid linked as well as independent apartments and social housing and so on. And there's a great interest in the measurement systems and in the trading platforms that will make this happen. And there's a number of entrepreneurial companies that are active in the space. However, progress has been very slow, principally because I think two reasons. One is feed-in tariffs that customers get are based around the wholesale price. So it's based on the opportunity costs to a retailer or other customers of buying that power. And so customers generally, if they select a reasonable offer from their retailer, can get a reasonable deal. So it's not obvious that there's gains from peer-to-peer trade. I think that's one factor that's meant it's been very slow to get off the ground. The other factor, of course, is once the electricity has left the household or the small business's premises and is consumed by a neighbor or a peer, they pay network fees to buy the electricity, and they pay the full retail price, which includes a whole lot of other on-costs. It's possible through peer-to-peer trading perhaps to decrease those other on-costs, the costs of the platform, the costs of acquiring the customers and the marketing and actually running the mechanism, but it's not possible to avoid the network charge, and those network charges are in fact very high. So there's very limited gain for the buyer to get a better deal from buying a neighbor's rooftop solar than there is from buying from the grid as a whole. There is policy interest now in local electricity tariffs that are meant to reflect a discount for electricity sourced locally as opposed to centrally. But this is very difficult and it's very complex because, as we know, there's a shared grid. So how do you identify the flow of electricity from a buyer to a seller?
Yeah, so in Europe, we have similar discussions, so in that respect. And one final question, so what's, let's say on average, from the grid tariff, so what's the share of the fixed charge compared to the use of system charge? So for a typical household, so per year, is it 50-50 or 10-90, or
yes,
to get an idea?
Okay. Yes, so these charges are seen for the household customer just in a tariff. So there is no breakdown of the individual elements. Typically, in our state, the median customer would have about a third of their bill, perhaps a little under a third of their bill will be fixed as a monthly charge. In the network element, the fixed element is a little bit smaller, but customers don't separately see the network element. They see the bundle charge.
Okay, so thank you.
So more questions or?
I have another question. Yeah,
please.
So there was a recent study by Bushnell and Noble who found that wholesale prices decrease when solar is generating, but they increase when solar sets due to higher backup costs. So how would that affect your results if you take into account these additional backup costs? And how about other integration costs beyond network costs? Because if I understood well, you take into account the higher cost of network for electricity bills, but how about additional integration costs, which could be backup costs or other higher integration costs?
Yes, so the Bushnell and Noven study in 2018 showed a very small effect at the margin linked to open cycle gas turbine raising the ramp rate. I thought it was very interesting at the time, but in our market is being superseded very rapidly by batteries, which are essentially incredibly flexible, and they are meeting a whole lot, and they will in future meet a whole lot of that ramping. So, you know, this idea that you've got gas pricing in at the ramping, I think is not relevant for us. And it's not relevant for us generally speaking anyway, because a lot of coal generation is at the margin even during that sort of ramping period. So it is market specific. Yes, these effects can occur, but they're temporal, they're conditional on the market, they're quite complex and so on. On the more general question you raise, the merit order effect study looks across the piece and says, looking at the pattern of prices, looking at the pattern of production, this is the aggregate that you get. And it's saying, I don't separately conceptually identify something which I call an adder for flexibility. It simply says this is the market as it stands. That market can evolve, of course, once you withdraw a whole lot of your coal and gas and other generation and need to invest in other generation as peaking or backup or sort of plant that can actually respond, then there's a different cost outcome. I'm not sure a ordinary least squares is able to capture that sort of effect. I think it would come down to engineering economic analysis where someone has a conception of optimum lease cost with optimum dispatch and load profiles of a certain type and generation production of a certain type, and then a certain view that if we had production looking like this, this was the cost, but because we've got a whole lot of solar coming in and knocking off, you know, a plant that would be better run more cheaply if it was running all day, and now we've got more expensive plant in the margin, here's an incremental cost. And there are those sorts of studies. I'm not a great believer in them because they're so subjective because of the counterfactual. You have to establish what you think is an engineering optimum. Things would be perfect, which is, and the underlying philosophy of that is the hospitals would work brilliantly if it wasn't for the patients. Well, demand and supply is how it is, and we should take the world as we find it.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for this discussion. I think now we have arrived. I apologize for Derek, but it is time to skip to the next presentation. Thank you, Bruce, for your presentation and the discussion. Now I ask for Franziska Schöniger to share his screen and to present us the paper, The Nighttime Solar Power Niche, Concentration Solar Power versus Photovoltaic with Storage. Please, Franziska, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. So you should be able to see my screen, full screen?
Yeah, it's good.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, good morning, at least from Austria. Hello to everybody and welcome to my presentation. So I'm going to talk about photovoltaics as well, but also another solar technology, which is concentrating solar power. And the work we did here was to compare different technology options that are able to provide dispatchable solar power. The work I did together with my colleague Gustav Resch, also from Technical University in Vienna in Austria, and my colleagues Thonig and Johan Lilliestam from the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam, Germany. Okay, so when we look at these two technologies, solar renewable technologies, amongst the other renewable technologies, we can see here that over the last 10 years, we saw quite huge LCOE reductions, levelized cost of electricity reductions for both technologies. They started off at quite high levels 10 years ago, and we saw quite some impressive cost decreases for photovoltaics, especially down to 6.8 cents per kilowatt hour. So these are numbers from 2019. From the IRENA report to 2020. But also for concentrating solar power, we saw this quite huge decrease of costs. Still, in the end, costs for concentrating solar power were at around 3 times as high than for solar photovoltaics in 2019. But when you compare it to the other technologies, you see this huge LCOE reductions for the solar technologies over the last 10 years. This is, of course, also because of the quite huge increase in installed capacities, especially for photovoltaics. So we had around almost 600 gigawatts of PV installed globally in 2019. And for concentrating solar power, much less, at around 1% of this capacity. So around 6 gigawatts of concentrating solar power were installed in 2019 globally. But what is important when we look at these LCOE numbers here is that LCOE does not include any value for dispatchability. So it's the pure cost for this unit of electricity. But concentrating solar power is usually combined with a thermal storage system. So it's CO2-free, renewable, and flexible or dispatchable technology in most cases. And this is also gaining more and more importance, of course, because we have these increasing shares of fluctuating wind and solar PV technologies in the power systems. So this storage component of concentrating solar power is gaining more and more importance. And we can also see this when we look at the plants installed in 2019, because they had on average storage capacity of around 9.5 hours of storage. That means that they were able to produce at full load electric output for 9.5 hours without any additional solar radiation coming in. So why is it even important to think about dispatchable solar power? We know this phenomenon called duck curve in systems with a high share of solar PV generation. You can see here these net load curves for Colorado as an example, with various PV penetration scenarios. And you can see that with increasing shares of PV, this duck curve, so it means this net load peak in the morning and in the evening becomes more distinct. So we know, the question we asked here was how to assure supply in a cost-efficient way in a future decarbonized power system that is rich in solar resources when the sun is not shining, to exactly cover these morning and evening peaks. And for that, we compared 3 technology options, which are in principle able to cover this demand. The first technology option was concentrating solar power combined with a thermal storage, molten salt thermal storage. The second option was PV plus a battery storage, as Bruce just mentioned before. And then the third option, which is also now developed in some areas, is the combination of photovoltaics with thermal storage. So we compared these options in a logical framework. Since we are here in the photovoltaic session, I would like to briefly recall the technological concept of concentrating solar power. So just how it works. Usually you have a receiver, so you have mirrors that reflect the direct normal irradiation onto a receiver system. This receiver system can have different forms, for example, tower, Fresnel lenses, parabolic trough, or dish systems. And within this receiver, you have a heat transfer fluid which is heated by the solar radiation and then is used to drive a steam process, a steam turbine, and a generator that produces the electricity. Within this system, you can add, or usually, as I said, it's combined with a thermal energy storage, which makes this the generation technology then flexible and dispatchable and independent from the solar radiation patterns. So how did we conceptualize this case study? As I said, we compared these 3 solar technology options. We did this for a specific site in Spain, in Europe, in the Sierra Nevada. So it's a quite sunny southern location in Europe. And the simulation was based on a typical meteorological year, based on the years 27 to 2016. We did not only compare the 3 technology options, but we also compared them for different cost scenarios. So we did one analysis comparing the current costs of all technology components. Then we did quite a comprehensive literature analysis on expected or possible cost scenarios, and we did a medium cost and a low cost scenario. On the right side, you can see this concept. So for on the left side, the CSP, so the solar field and receiver part, then the storage and the power block. These three components are the parts of the concentrating solar power. Then the PV plus battery part, which is quite straightforward. And then for the PV plus thermal storage technology options, you need this component of an electric heater, which is able to produce heat from electricity and then feed that into the thermal storage. Here you can see on the bottom, you can see the solar radiation patterns for direct normal irradiation, which is used by the concentrating solar power, and the global horizontal irradiance used by the PV panels. So how did we set up the model? We said in our model, the technology option has to be able to deliver electricity for a certain time span after sunset. So this time span varies from 1 to 24 hours. And in this time span, the technology option has to be able to deliver a continuous load of 100 megawatt electric covered from the storage without any additional solar radiation coming in. And the model then we calculated which electricity generation capacities are needed for that. So in terms of CSP, the solar field and power block size, and for PV, the PV panels, and also the storage capacities that are needed to cover these different delivery periods. On the right side, you can see one example for a 4 hours delivery period covered by PV plus battery. So you can see here the time on the x-axis. So after sunset, the delivery period starts, 4 hours of 100 megawatt. And during the day, the PV is generating electricity, the battery is loading, and then during those 4 hours, the battery is discharging. And this was simulated for the whole year. And we did this for the different periods between 1 and 24 hours for all technology options. So the modeling approach was an invest and dispatch optimization, where the objective function minimized the overall cost. We used the open source energy system model Balmoral for that, which was developed at the Danish Technical University and is now developed and used in a broad range of universities and institutions worldwide. It's a model which uses perfect foresight, so the model is able to see the weather conditions during the whole year, which is of course a limitation here. Yes, so then let me jump into the results. The graphic on the right side is the central results graphic, and I'm going to explain it. So on the x-axis, you see the different storage hours from 1 to 24 hours, and on the y-axis, the specific costs which are for 1 megawatt hour. And the different technology options are the different colors. So in gray, the option PV plus battery. In orange, the option concentrating solar power plus thermal storage. And in purple, the option photovoltaics plus thermal storage. The different lines are then the cost scenarios. So the full line is always the current cost scenario, the dashed line, the medium cost scenario, and the dotted line, the low cost scenario. So how can we read this graph? For example, when we look at the current cost scenarios and the two options, PV plus battery and concentrating solar power plus thermal storage, then we can see that at current costs, their lines, so this gray full line and the orange full line, intersect at around 2 to 3 hours. That means that for storage hours up to 2 to 3 hours, PV plus battery is the cheaper option. And then over 2 to 3 hours, CSP plus thermal storage gets cheaper. The reason for that is that there is a quite huge cost component for CSP, which is the power block, because there has to be a 100 megawatt power block for all storage hours, because it doesn't matter if you have to deliver it for 1 hour or for 24 hours, the power block size is always the same. So this is the reason for this decreasing cost trend for CSP mainly. Whereas for PV plus battery, the costs scale more linearly. Then if you compare the costs for the medium cost scenario, then this point of intersection moves to around 4 hours. And then in the low cost scenario, PV plus battery is the cheaper option for up to 10 hours. So we can see that this point moves to the right to higher storage hours. When we compare PV plus thermal storage with CSP plus thermal storage, we can see that PV plus thermal storage is always more expensive than CSP plus thermal storage. And the intersection points are at around 4 hours for current costs, 8 hours for medium costs, or never for the low cost scenario. The reason for that is that, of course, when you convert electricity from the PV panels to heat and then back to electricity, you have quite a high efficiency loss. And this is the reason for these higher costs here. Yeah, and what we can see from the whole results is that CSP plus thermal storage is more economic for longer storage periods, unless we can see a very strong learning for PV plus battery, which is stronger than the learning for CSP and thermal storage, because the cost scenarios we show here, we don't know if they are reached in the future. It's possible that one technology components has a much stronger learning rate than others. For example, batteries have a stronger learning than the solar receiver system for CSP. And then, of course, these points of intersection change. So we encourage you to not really look at these absolute values here on the y-axis, but rather on the dynamics of the different technology components and the depending on the storage hours and depending on the cost development. So that was the objective of this work. Which is also interesting, I think, which is also interesting is that we can see quite much learning potential in battery storage in the literature. So for PV plus battery, which is the gray area, you have quite huge or big difference between the lines. And the main reason for this difference is the expected or possible cost reductions in battery. So this will be a quite important factor in this whole development. And yeah, there's quite much learning potential compared to the other technology components from what we found from literature. And this will have a great impact on the competitiveness of this technology option in the future. Okay.
5 minutes?
Sorry?
No, I just said 5 minutes. You have just 5 minutes. Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you very much. Then let me come to my conclusions. So the main conclusion really is that the competitiveness of concentrating solar power combined with thermal energy storage in comparison to PV plus storage is highly dependent on the required storage size. And that there are niches for both technology options, CSP plus thermal storage and PV plus battery storage. And that it's necessary to develop all of these technology components to reach these cost reductions in the future, to allow us then to take advantage of the optimal solutions for different demand profiles in the future. And these solutions then can also contribute to minimize overall system costs. However, if this happens, is mainly dependent on the electricity market design and in what way and to what extent the solar dispatchability or dispatchability in general is required and rewarded by the market design. And this, of course, is also highly dependent on the policy decisions here. And in the end, I would like to show you some current examples of the complementary use of CSP and PV globally. There was a tender in Dubai where they asked for the best offer for manageable CO2-free energy on demand, about 200 gigawatt hours per year from 4 p.m. to 10 a.m., so overnight. Whatever the combination between technologies is, as long as it is CO2 free and in line with the 100% decarbonization goal for power. And the winning bid here was the combination of 700 megawatts CSP, 200 megawatt PV, and up to 15 hours thermal storage. So this was the bid winning this tender here in Dubai. And then there was a quite recent development in Morocco in Nor Midelt 3, where they announced that it's going to be the first project where globally where they combine CSP plus thermal storage and PV plus thermal storage. So where the electricity from PV is also used to heat the thermal storage. So yeah, that was quite interesting for us to see these developments. Yeah, so the conclusion is CSP can react flexibly to an energy system's need, and the condition for that is that the market design has to value the flexibility or the dispatchability. For example, how it was done in this tender by explicitly requiring nighttime power. Okay. Yeah. This work was done as part of the MUSTEC project, which was a Horizon 2020 project. There's also a publication on it on the top. So there you can find more details if you're interested. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to receive your questions or comments.
Thank you, Franziska, for this nice presentation. So questions or remarks? Yeah, Bruce?
Yes, I was just going to ask what the efficiency losses were in converting from the stored heat back into electricity. What's your round trip losses on that?
So for the electricity to heat, it was almost 100%, but then from heat back to electricity, it's the steam process, so it was around 42%, I think. So, and this is the cost advantage which has to be reached by the PV in order to make it happen. So
we've had a big effort over many years to get some kind of a CSP going, and PV costs just came down so quickly, and now the battery costs and the flexibility and the big difference, not just with the flexibility and the cost, is you can put the battery on the customer's premises, so they actually avoid all of the network and the energy supply costs. And that just seems to be shifting the balance completely in favor of PV plus battery rather than large thermal storage.
Yeah, I mean, here we looked at utility scale plants, so this is a little bit different compared to the households, but of course, yeah. And as I said, so this battery component especially is really a key issue here, and how cost reductions can be achieved here. But on the other side, for example, in this NOR 3 in Midelt in Morocco, they planned to have, so they included the PV then because it got so cheaper than planned. So it was not planned from the beginning, but then they included it, the PV, to heat the thermal storage.
Yeah,
because
which is weird. I mean, it's such a funny thing.
Yeah,
PVs just pick up so cheap, I guess.
Yes. That's only possible if it's really, really cheap. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, another thing is with they are now talking about, or which is a thing in the CSP industry, to use old steam turbines or steam processes in coal power plants and combine them with a heat storage. And there, so this storage is really the main component they are now focusing on.
Interesting. Thank you.
Other questions? Perhaps I have a remark. This is a paper who's talking about night energy, in fact, installation for the night. So what is your anticipations, projection for the impacts on prices in the night? Because this is not a question or an issue we have in mind. So what is your idea about the price impact? That could have been.
Yeah, I think it's this question goes a little bit in the direction of the question Bruce got before. So about these backup costs, and if it's considered in the system, of course, we have to think about that as well. And as I said, of course, this solution, so CSP, only makes sense in regions which have a lot of solar radiation and which are quite rich in solar radiation. And those countries, of course, have this problem of the duck curve more than other regions. So, and if we want to get rid of any fossil backup, we have to think about options. And the question is, will battery be able to cover this for the whole night in the future? And yeah, we show ranges of cost projections. So of course, everybody always wants to know the exact price, but this is not possible, of course. But we can, yeah, the idea was really to show the dynamics of this development, these developments.
Yeah, of course. We have now only 1 minute to last remark or last question. If there are not. Okay, thank you, Franziska.
Thank you very much.
Presentation. So now I ask for the next presenter. I think it's Hans Auer. Please, Hans. Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
So you would present a paper on the potential rooftop PV and desire hold appliance with negative external electricity demand, an evidence from Austria. So the floor is yours.
Okay, just a moment. Okay, so now it seems to work.
Yeah.
So good morning, everybody. So it's a pleasure to contribute to this session, and I will discuss a little bit, let's say, the role of a rooftop PV system simply as a household appliance with negative electricity demand. And our analysis then will show an empirical case from Austria in Europe. So at the beginning, I will discuss a little bit the two colliding philosophies. So where PV systems in the future might fit best. So either on the wholesale markets as a utility scale technology fitting into markets, or rather at the end user, prosumer, and so for self-consumption, and also in the context of energy communities. Of course, there are a lot of challenges ahead. We already heard the grid operator, the distribution grid operator, has a revenue challenge because the missing kilowatt hours, of course, not distributed. So they will also reduce the corresponding revenues. And this has to be somehow covered because cost-efficient operation of the distribution grid needs to be guaranteed at the end of the day. And then I'll show, starting from the past, so on a single household on PV self-generation. So I try to extend then the concept of energy communities to multi-apartment building, and then going beyond the meter and showing energy community concepts at different geographical borders, and finally try to upscale let's say the potential to Austria. So to get an idea, so what's the building integrated potential, so from today's point of view in Austria. So if we would have, let's say, a large number of nice energy communities with around 10 buildings or so, what could be achieved, and this also against the target we have in Austria to reach 100% renewable electricity generation in 2030, and this would mean we would need around 10 to 12 gigawatt on installed PV capacity. We are starting already right now from a rather high level. We have significant hydropower, and the remaining is mainly PV and wind. So we already heard also in the previous presentations, we already heard that we have challenges, let's say, on the wholesale market. So the left-hand side shows rather, let's say, the planning approach we know from the past. So the energy planners trying to favor PV as a utility scale technology, and we already heard about the duck curve. Here we have California with the merit order effect, and also Bruce has shown let's say the $6.4 per megawatt hour, so reducing, of course, on average the wholesale prices. So on the one hand, of course, this is a benefit for the consumers, and on the other hand, it's, let's say, missing profit, of course, from those from the generators on the wholesale markets. So at present, of course, we already have power purchase agreements on the wholesale markets, and this is what might work. But in the future, when talking about, let's say, utility scale PV, of course, power purchase agreements, this might be part of the solution. But in the future, we have an inherent, let's say, profitability problem of bidding into energy-only markets. So if we still rely on energy-only markets, we might have problems. But so nobody knows, so in the future, which products we will let's say, trade in the future. Maybe it's power gradients within, let's say, an hour, or other kind of flexibilities. And also, of course, the demand side bidding will get much more important. So here I show one paper, Hartley Corpus, who elaborate on demand side bidding based on the opportunity cost on the different consumers, also depending on heavily depending on sector coupling, and then of course depending how to cover their energy services best. So but this is not the topic we have today. Today we are talking about here the right hand side. So it's energy democracy, and this is building integrated PV, and PV is the key technology at end user level who can trigger this. And we are, let's say, moving much more again to the physics of the energy system, where we try to match supply and demand, or at least trade it peer-to-peer. So the figure on the right-hand side shows on the one hand the end user bill. We have mainly three parts. The electricity itself, it's in green, it's a variable part. Then the grid tariff, a fixed and a variable part, and then taxes and surcharges. And of course, local self-generation benefits, let's say, from the variable parts of the end user bill. And also, Bruce has shown that around 30% so of a typical household customer can be covered by self-consumption. Here we see it in yellow. If we implement further peer-to-peer trading concepts, so if we have, let's say, a small energy community, you can even benefit more from the different diversification of generation and load profiles, and you reach maybe 40–45% or something like that. And of course, if you include battery systems, so one prosumer, or in the peer-to-peer trading concepts, you can come up to 70% or so, 70–75% of local electricity generation. But you always will need also in the future the grid. You always need, let's say, the public grid and the purchase from the grid. So electricity autarky is not a goal, also not in these energy community concepts we are talking. And here my, let's say, provocative question is, what's the difference between, let's say, energy saving bulbs and a PV system? Both of them are simply household appliances, and both finally save electricity consumed. But to some extent in the discussion, so the PV prosumers, they are nest defilers, or they are denoted to be selfish, simply quitting alleged solidarity. But this is not, let's say, this is not true if we in the first step only talk about local self-consumption without feeding into the grid. So I simply purchase less kilowatt hours, and this is a contribution to energy efficiency, to saving kilowatt hours, and to some extent the fulfillment of the energy efficiency directive we have in Europe. It's exactly the same. But of course we have, okay, so I try, okay, now it works better. So of course, if now a significant number of PV prosumers starts putting their PV on the rooftop, so here we have on the left-hand axis, on the horizontal axis, the share of PV self-consumption on the distribution grid, and on the vertical axis, the revenues of the grid operators. So the gray area shows the gradually decreasing annual revenues of the grid operators. So if we have increasing shares of local self-consumption, and this of course is a problem. And therefore, naturally, the grid operator has an incentive to increase the fixed grid tariff component. As Bruce also said, in Australia, this happened in the past, and I think this is very important, because then at least parts of these revenue problems we see on the right-hand side can be mitigated. Of course, there is still a missing gap. And now let's see in our next slide if this is justified. So when talking about the electricity grid, so we are talking about a natural monopoly. So I do not now elaborate on monopoly theory, so this is part of our classes at the university, but we have several characteristics of a natural monopoly: economies of scale, additivity of cost, and so on, and sunk cost, and capital intensive infrastructures. So the main characteristics is that the average cost, that they are higher than the marginal cost of the grid operation business. And if we are looking on the left-hand side on this figure, we also see, when having on the one hand the average cost curve, the declining and elastic demand. So we have a certain quantity delivered through this grid, and what I indicated here in yellow, this is the fixed part. So the difference between the average cost and the marginal cost. And now on the right-hand side, so if we have local PV self-consumption and then increasing energy communities, so demand gets more elastic. So we have the green demand curve. And this shows that less electricity then is delivered in this grid, and the yellow line is longer. So this means the difference between the average and the marginal cost of the grid operator gets bigger. And this is supposed to be the fixed charge, also according to textbook theory. And this, let's say, this justifies that distribution grid operators, that they are lobbying for higher fixed charges, fixed components. And we'll see this will have many benefits in the longer term. In the short term, of course, this is a disincentive for local self-consumption, or also for energy communities, because you in your final bill, the variable component gets lower, and then of course the optimal size of your PV system again gets smaller, because then you have the perfect match in terms of economic viability. But in the medium to long term, so we can overcome also many other problems if we increase this fixed component. So now, okay, so now I try to develop, let's say, the story of local PV self-generation. So this is a figure we developed in 2012. So in those days, we developed a simple model, and we tried to identify economic grid parity. So we simply calculated the net present value in these different European countries with the main parameters. So the energy shield and mainly the retail price. So in green, the retail price, of course, is the most important part, your energy bill. If it's very high, you have a let's say, a higher incentive to install your local PV system. And we see here it, for instance, in Germany. And in Germany, in 2012, there was a grid parity. So without any kind of subsidy or without any feed-in tariff and so on, it was simply rational to install a PV system. But of course, not a 5 kilowatt peak system, but a size which perfectly matches with the load profile. So maybe only 2 or 1.5 or 2 or 2.5 kilowatt peak, but not, of course, 5 kilowatt peak, because then it would be oversized and not perfectly, let's say, matching with your load profile. And this discussion then triggered in our areas the energy community concepts. And the first, let's say, movement was in Germany, but also now in Austria since a couple of years. So we tried to fix this within the multi-apartment buildings. We have different units and it needs to be done on a voluntary basis. So nobody in the apartments, in these multi-apartment buildings can be forced to contribute to this concept. So it needs to be on a voluntary basis, but then we have different, let's say, interfaces between the public and the private grid and the legal and regulatory responsibilities. So this is the major problem we have right now. It's not a technical problem, but it's simply a legal problem. Also with the underground car park, if we want to include it with a PV system or now with e-mobility and so on. So these are many legal and regulatory problems. And here, so we took one building here in Vienna. So the details are not of interest here on this slide. We took a multi-apartment building and we tried to conduct different analysis. So we tried to equip it with rooftop PV, but also with PV on the facade. We took, let's say, rather an elder building, which where there is the need of deep renovation, where there is the need, let's say, to think about the heat system changes and so on. But now in a first step, simply talk about the operational model. So we do not, let's say, improve the facade. We do not talk about heat system changes. We simply put PV on the rooftop. We have 10 units here, and then we started let's say, different effects. And here on this slide, you see on the left-hand side, the vertical axis is the optimal PV capacity in kilowatts peak. So this was the objective function of this model. Always trying to find the optimal cost minimizing PV capacity. And we are talking with here about concepts without any kind of financial support or feed-in tariffs or something similar. So this is the optimal PV capacity calculation. And on the right hand side, we see on the vertical axis the net present value of this multi-apartment building per year. This is on the one hand, of course, the cost for purchasing electricity, and of course the net present value also for this own PV system on the rooftop and on the facades. And then the different codes on the horizontal axis, they simply talk about if we have a building attached only or building integrated, if it's rooftop or facade integrated, and what's the angle of the building. So the details are not important. So we see the different colors here. Blue is south. So this is in our areas the most favorable, let's say, orientation. So in Australia, it's exactly the opposite, it's north. But we also see here, for instance, in this concept that we have in one case, even PV systems on the north side. So it depends, of course, on the circumstances, but it's mainly south or east or west. So, and we see here the different optimal capacities. And now if we extend it and also talk about deep renovation, we have here some, let's say, benefits compared to the status quo, compared to purchasing 100% of the grid. And if we think about retrofitting the building and the heat system change. So in the next slide, here we see we took this building and we conducted deep renovation. So from 160 kilowatt hours per square meter and year to 60 kilowatt hours per square meter and year. On the left-hand side again, on the vertical axis, you see the renovation cost. So for wall insulation, exchanging the windows, improving all this kind of stuff. We see the blue lines of what are the different renovation costs. And on the other hand, on the right-hand side, we see, let's say, the cost reductions on reduced net present values for implementing these PV systems and conducting this peer-to-peer trading within these multi-apartment buildings. So these are the gains, and the delta. The delta is the profitability gap. So from the renovations point of view, is much smaller compared to the situation without considering PV at all. So this means, or the conclusion of this analysis is that we need to consider both when talking about deep renovations. We must understand the generation side, also the PV system, which can trigger these concepts, and on the other side, of course, heat system exchanges and wall insulations, because then the public, let's say, support or financial incentive to conduct deep renovation is much smaller compared to separate treatment of the supply and the demand side. Okay, so this only was one example now of peer-to-peer trading within a multi-apartment building, and then we extended the concept. So we go beyond.
1 minute. 1 minute.
Yeah. We go beyond the building level, and then we conduct, let's say, different settlement patterns in Austria, where we have 4 different concept: the city area, town area, mixed area, and rural area. So based on statistical data, we conducted energy communities with 10 buildings, and not several of them are PV prosumers. There are also a few simply consumers, which contribute only with their load. And the main question there was, is it possible to reach these 12 gigawatt hours? And here we see just one city energy community on the left-hand side. So depending on the different concepts, how to share the joint PV produced, so only within those who have PV systems, or within several of them. In city areas on the left-hand side, in rural areas, of course, it's mainly south-oriented, and in city areas, it's more diverse. And then we scaled it up with the statistical parameters, and we came to the conclusion we could simply implement this goal we have in Austria in the next 10 years, building integrated. So we would not, let's say, if regulatory and legal laws would allow it, simply be able to implement the entire share within the next 10 years, entirely building integrated without any utility scale. And this leads me already to the conclusion. So then this is the last slide. So in general, PV systems, they are household appliances with negative demand. At present, of course, it's the barriers we have in legislation and regulations. But of course, we have to take care about the grid operator. So they need their annual revenues, and therefore much greater weight is needed for the fixed grid tariff component. So if we increase this component, so their situation is much more convenient compared to the status quo. So this shall, let's say, guarantee, let's say, the main part of the annual revenue. But on the other hand, of course, we have to think about a new dynamic grid component in addition to send the correct price signals about the current grid state. So if there is a lot of PV in the afternoon and you need to meet your parameters within the grid, this is important. And then, of course, this is in the short term bad news for PV self-consumption and for energy communities, but then the communities have to find the most fitting combinations of generation and load patterns and also optimal sizes. And in the medium term, so if the CO2 price increases, then the electricity price is supposed to increase again, also in the retail tariff, and this might compensate, let's say, again, the variable part at present from the grid tariff component, and then, of course, in the future, shifting to the electricity component. Okay, so
okay,
thank
thanks.
you.
Thank you, Hans, for the presentation. So we have 3 minutes for questions or remarks.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Thank you, Hans. That was very, very interesting. We've had exactly the same issues of fixed and variable, and I think the policy and the regulatory framework has been supportive of more fixed on the basis that you know, networks need to get back their revenue. But the technology landscape doesn't sit still, and distributed batteries and EVs, which can grid connect, are rising as prospects very quickly. And I wonder whether utilities are going to choose to some degree not to increase fixed charges, even if they sacrifice revenue from those customers, because they'll be worried that communities and individual customers will drop the grid altogether. I'm doing that, for example, with my gas supply. I can convert through heat pumps and get rid of gas completely in my house. And the fixed charge is part of my reasoning for that. Now, there is no technology change the gas industry can introduce that would cause them to change it. They can decrease their fixed charge, but the benefits are very large for me to actually switch across. And I'm looking at the technology landscape and seeing rapid change. And so I'm not even sure if regulatory approval processes to increase fixed charges are going to keep up. I think there's real competition coming to the industry. Do you have a view on that?
Yes. So as you said, the big question is, so what's supposed to be the optimum, depending, of course, on the individual situation? What's the optimum from the grid operator's point of view between the fixed charge and the variable charge? So I totally agree that it's not a solution, let's say, to opt for 100% fixed charging or even 80-90% or something like that, because this may simply be the argument that people are really thinking about, or theoretically would think about electricity autarky, and this is not the goal. So from society's point of view and welfare economics point of view, so this is nonsense, and you have this trade-off with these competing technologies like battery systems. So in slide 3, I've shown the stationary battery system, so where you can, let's say, reach 70% or 75% self-sufficiency, and of course this is bad news for let's say for the grid operator, and therefore with electro vehicles, and therefore, of course, it's in the future all these let's say trade-offs, and between the flexibility options, it's demand response, it's battery systems, electric vehicles, and the grid itself, because the distribution grid itself is a storage option with an infinite let's say capacity size.
Yeah.
And therefore
please, I think we have to skip to the last presentation.
Okay.
I apologize, but please now we have the last presentation, the last paper of this but for this session. I ask for Olusola Bamisile to open the camera and to switch on the mic and to share your slides, please. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Please, can the last speaker stop sharing so that I can share?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so now
it's done. It's done.
Yeah, I try to unshare.
I think it's done, so you can share.
It's done already, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Please, Mr. Bamisile.
All
okay,
right. Can
it's
you
good.
see my screen?
Yeah. We see it in. So
Okay.
please, you can start.
All right. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's afternoon from China. So good afternoon, everybody. Today, unlike the other presenters, I would be presenting about a research that I did a while ago. And I started a while ago, then completed it when I came to China. And it's about policy development for solar water heaters in the Mediterranean. This is a case study of Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. This research was carried out at the University of Electronic Science and Technology of China, but it was supported by Cyprus International University. I used to work with Cyprus International University before I moved to China in 2018. So I collected the data before leaving, and I did the analysis in 2019. And because of the COVID issue, this paper was meant to be presented last year in this conference. So here we are today, and today my presentation content will include, I will just give a brief introduction. I'll talk about the problem statements, and I'll go to the materials and methods that we use, and I would give a results and discussion, and I would give the brief conclusion. I should also state at this point that I'm actually an engineering person, so I did this because of my love for renewable energy and energy, and I included some collaborators, and which are from the management side of energy, and their names were on the first slide, and I'm sorry I forgot to acknowledge them. So I'm going into the introduction. Now, Cyprus is the third largest island in the Mediterranean in terms of landmass, and is also the third largest island in the eastern part of the Mediterranean in terms of population. Now, Cyprus has a great potential to domesticate solar energy because of its climate and climatic advantages and the geographic positioning. The average daily solar radiation of Cyprus is 5.4 kilowatt hour per meter square on the horizontal surface, and the mean daily solar radiation varies from 2.3 to 7.2 kilowatt hour per meter square for the island. I stayed there for 4 years, and I really know that in person that the solar potential for the island is very high. And also, this is a solar map of the island just at the top of the screen. And now, solar technology is solar water heater technology is one of the most matured solar energy application technologies. Now, the commercial application of this technology has been available in the market for over 40 years. And it's one of the things I noticed. I'm actually originally from Africa, and when I moved to Cyprus, one of the first things I noticed in the country was the installation of solar water heaters on almost all the buildings. And that was quite intriguing. And I would talk more about the research in the course of the presentation. So Cyprus is the third in terms of global per capita solar water heating systems installation, and then Barbados and Austria actually were first and second as at the time we wrote this paper. So in fact, I think 2 years before this, Cyprus was the first. But one thing that actually raised the question about this research is that despite the huge amount of solar water heating system installed in Cyprus, there is actually no policy, and there has never been a policy that mandates the installation of solar water heaters. It's very rare on the island to go maybe 2 buildings without actually finding one that has solar water heater installed on it. So now, the only policy available in Cyprus is a subsidy policy for solar water heaters. And this is still at the planning stage. In fact, that is yet to be implemented, but it's still at the planning stage. So in existing literature, there was no in-depth research into the current status, utilization, and policy of solar water heater systems in Cyprus. So we felt there is a gap in literature about regarding the utilization and policy of solar water heaters on the island. So in this research, we used a binary logic regression model to check the willingness of Cypriots to accept a policy that enforces solar water heaters for each building, and chi-square crosstab analysis was used to analyze the current status of solar water heaters, and the determinants to the acceptance of this policy will also be identified, and the prospect of the policy in the nearest future will be considered. Now, we collected primary data from 1,000 residents in Cyprus across the island, and then this was supported by the university, which is Cyprus International University. And the main contribution of this paper is the determination of factors that encourages solar water policies based on the primary data. So different questions were asked, and this would be explained in this section about the materials and methods. Now, different questions were asked to each person that was interviewed in different residents. So for this research, we used a standardized quantitative survey and data from 1,000 housing units in Cyprus through a random sampling method. Now, out of these 1,000 apartments, and there were different classes. Now, 55% of them were apartments/dormitories, and were studio apartments and dormitories, and 28% of them were like 2 or 3 bedroom apartments. Now, also 12% were duplex, and 5% fall in other categories. Now, it's noteworthy also that in Cyprus, the installation of solar water heaters, they are not just based for a particular building. Each apartment in the building has its own solar water heater installed for it. So it's not like a general big installation for a building where everybody is sharing, but each apartment has its own installation, and that is also why we had to take the samples based on different housing units. Now, respondents in this housing unit were asked questions about the use of solar water system. Now, the willingness to recommend solar water heater systems to neighbors, and their support for a policy that enforces this kind of system throughout the Cyprus. Also, the respondents were asked about the number of years they've been using the system. Now, the functionality of the system and the sufficiency of the hot water produced daily, and the knowledge regarding also the insulation of the pipes, because we know that pipe insulation actually plays an important role in solar thermal systems in general, because you're able to reduce the losses from this solar thermal system. Now, one of the objectives of this study is to ascertain the determinants of solar water heating installation policy enforcement in Cyprus, and respondents were asked whether they would support a policy that enforced such for all housing units in Cyprus. Now, and the statistical analysis usually adapted for a dichotomous dependent variable at the binary logic or probit regression model. So now in this study, we adopt a binary logic model based on the assumption that errors are there to a standard logic distribution instead of a standard normal distribution in the probit logic model. So I actually didn't give maybe a full distribution of the frequency table of the questionnaire that we used, but I will just go directly to some of the things we did. Now, one of the main questions we asked is that is solar water heater, are they worth the investment? Now, that was one of the main focus of our research. And we also asked the residents the number of years they've or the installation time of their solar water heating system. Now, for those that have been installed in less than a year to the time the data was collected, now most of them felt that the solar water heater, they award the investment, which is 68.3%. Also, for those that have used it between 1 to 5 years, 79.5% feels that the system is worth the investment on the island. Why? One thing we noticed is that as the years grow larger, from less than 1 year to 10 years, now the percentage response to the fact that the solar water heaters are worth the investment increases, because those that have used the system between 1 to 10 years, now we had 89% saying that it's worth the investment. Now, for those that have used it over 10 years, now the percentage of those who agree to the fact that the solar water heaters are worth the investment were a bit lower. It's just 88.8%. And then some of them actually said they don't know. Like we had 6 respondents out of the 1,000 that we took that said they don't know. So out of the total respondents, now also I would like to note at this point that about 200 of our respondents actually they don't have solar water heaters installed in their apartments. So out of the 1,000 respondents or 1,000 residents that we actually interviewed, just 77.8% has solar water heater installed in the apartment. And out of the 778 apartments, just 84.3% of them feels that the solar water heater is worth the investment. Now, the next question, which we try to check against the investment, is the solar water heater still working? You know, we check it against, and then for most of those that that have installed that have solar water heater installed in their apartment. Now, 84.3% of them actually mentioned that their systems are still working, and out of this, 86.1% feels is worth the investment. And it's also noteworthy that even those that have their system that those that have systems that are not working again, I mean, the ones that have their systems that maybe they're shut down or they have a problem at the moment, at the time we were collecting the data, 69.5% of them still feels that this system are worth the investment, considering the case study we used. And we also asked about in terms of the insulation of pipes, and we noticed that out of the 778 residents that have that have solar water heaters installed in their building, about half of them actually have their pipe insulated. Now, we asked them because, you know, insulation of pipe also increases the cost of solar water installation, and 86.8% of these people actually feels it's worth the investment, while only 13% feels it's not worth it. And for those even who don't have insulated pipes, we still have a higher percentage, which is 83.9%, that feels that the solar water heater systems are worth the investment. So in the last part, we tried to check, we also asked different residents, different participants in this research, now that the solar water heaters, do they produce enough quantity, or the quantity of the hot water produced? And in this category, we didn't try to put a number to it. What we tried to do was just to tell them he produced the exact quantity they needed, more than enough, and then not enough, and then some of them can't say. And we would see that for even those that produced enough, those that produced more than enough, not enough, and those that even can't remember, all of attest to the fact that the solar water heating system is worth the investment. Now, there are a lot of other results that we have from this research. It's not just more of what the investment that we actually did. We did other research, but due to the time for the presentation, I didn't put, all right, thank you.
5 minutes.
I can see 5 minutes more. Yeah. So due to the time of presentation and the volume of our paper, we didn't put all of the results in our slides. And now, the likelihood of recommending solar water heater system also depicted a highly significant positive correlation with support for enforcement of solar water installation. And in essence, the more the respondent is likely to recommend solar water heaters to others. So the more likely they are to support the policy that mandates that all homes in northern Cyprus should have solar water heaters. Not only is the location of Cyprus one of the most suitable environment to enforce this policy, but it is also positively received in general. As now I mentioned, 81, even considering some of them that don't have the system installed at the moment, in total 81.75% of the 1,000 observations that we had supported the enforcement of such policies. And we did an odd ratio analysis, and I'll just mention one of the things, one of these odd ratio analysis. Now, the highest odd ratio value we observe belongs to the recommendation, what recommending to other people and what recommending to others to install. The variable is with 6.19, and it implies that a 1 unit increase in recommendation produces a 519 increase in the odds that they would also support the solar water heater policy in northern Cyprus. I will just give the conclusions and recommendation for our research. Now, we've mentioned about the introduction and some of the things we did in our research. Now, the application, utility, durability of currently installed systems were also investigated in this research. In the full paper, we gave an expansive details about some of the other findings we got from our research. Now, it was found that having consistently working solar water heating systems, especially with the presence of insulated pipes, the perception of the solar water heating system being worth the time, and then considering the system as an integral part of their buildings, were all positively correlated determinants of supporting the solar water heater policy enforcement. Also, factors such as the stage in the year of installation, whether the installed system still works, whether the pipes installed are insulated in nature, or whether the quantity of the hot water finally produced, all affect the respondent's perspective about this policy. Also, we find that respondents are more likely to support solar water heater policy enforcement if they themselves see the benefits of the system and consider the installation of solar water heater good enough to recommend to others. So we brought out some recommendations for the government based on our research. And then first of it, people are only willing to install and support such policy if indeed it works consistently and they are able to maximize the benefit. And then the second is that people are more likely to support such a policy if it presents itself a good enough investment. Also, the installation should be able to produce enough water, and these are some of the things that we recommended in our extended paper. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I think we can take questions now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, sir, for this presentation. You are in time, it's no problem. And are there some questions about this paper? Some remarks? Yeah, Franziska, open the camera.
Yeah, I have one question. Maybe I missed it, but you said that with increasing time of the installation, the people are more are recommending it more. So
Yeah.
the older the installation is, the more they would recommend it. So is there an explanation for that?
I think because of the solar potential in the island. Now, if you're not using solar water heaters, then you would have to use either a gas-fired hot water system or an electric heater water system. And the electricity tariffs in comparison to using solar water heaters is actually higher. So over the years, those that have used it maybe for 5 to 10 years, they realize that what they save in terms of their electricity bills or their gas bills is actually it's higher in comparison to what they have invested into the solar water heating system. So I feel that is the logical explanation I can give at this point, because also as somebody that lived there for 4 years, I remember on the few occasions I had to run the electric heater to heat the water, maybe for some freezing days in winter, and I know the effect on my electricity bill for that month, and I can do the calculation with my engineering mind. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But when talking about the electricity bill, is photovoltaics then an option, or is there some competition between?
Yeah, on the island currently, they don't have much of what's it called now, decentralized photovoltaic installed systems. The photovoltaic systems they have are more of the grid connected ones, and they have more like two. The time I was living, there were two photovoltaic plants. One was 1.4 megawatts and the other one was like 1.1 megawatts. One was actually installed by the university I was with at that point. So most buildings have not considered the use of individual photovoltaic system, because I really don't know about that. I don't know the perception. Maybe that would be a good research for researchers in that region, why they actually have not considered decentralized photovoltaic system, and then why they are still using the grid electricity despite the electricity tariff.
Okay, thank you very much.
Other remarks, questions? You talk about benefits. Have you been able to quantify them, to have quantifications of kinds of benefits? Because it's an important point in your paper, yeah, as you said. Yeah.
In terms of benefit, we didn't quantify it, but one thing we focused more on our paper is the willingness. Our paper actually approaches this policy from the willingness perspective. So we didn't go much into questioning them about the benefits of the solar water heating system. I think the only question we asked about it is the fact that if the system was producing enough water or more than enough, and that was the only question we went into. But we wanted to, this research was actually intended to serve as the first stage or the first step in terms of a policy development. So we checked the willingness of the residents and then the citizens. Then I think after this research, more can be like a deeper what's it called now? An intrinsic question, or intrinsic questions can be asked from the residents about benefits and some other things that would give more indicators before the government can actually do what's it called now, before they can actually enforce such policy.
Okay, thanks for your question, for your answer. Well, I think that now there are no more questions. And so it's time to say goodbye. It's time to conclude this session, and very stimulating questions, very stimulating session about photovoltaics. And so I would like to say thanks for all presenters. Thanks to all presenters, and now you can skip to the others session of the morning or the afternoon. I don't know where you are. And well, so bye-bye. Oh.
Bye-bye. It was a pleasure.
Please, a little message from the organization team for the speakers. Can you please upload your presentation to the platform? Thanks you very much.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Okay. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.